Easy peasy. Spanish pronunciation, lesson number 1. By Andres.
Okay, buenas tardes. So the lesson for today will focus on el alfabeto y la pronunciación en español. That is the alphabet and pronunciation in Spanish. The way that we are going to organize this lesson is cover first the alphabet in Spanish, but then highlight some of the unique sounds that the Spanish language has, unique especially in comparison to the English language. We'll identify and go over some of the patterns that are common in the Spanish language, look over some examples and practice identifying and pronouncing the sounds that we see. Okay. El alfabeto en español. As you can see here, we see at least two cognados or cognates. That is words. Those are words that are very similar in two languages. In this case, Spanish and English. So alfabeto is alphabet, español, Spanish. We will probably be able to identify the meaning of those two words just because of their similarity to their English equivalent. We will see a lot of cognates throughout this lesson, and it will just be a way for us to sort of see that we already know some words in Spanish, and it will be a way for us to expand our vocabulary. Okay, but here with el alfabeto en español, we know that it has 27 letters, one more than the English alphabet, and that additional letter will be elle, which is here between N and O. This particular graphic has 29 letters. It has che and elle, which are no longer part of the Spanish alphabet, but we will go over them because they are very common and they produce specific sounds. But yes, they are included here because of those unique sounds that they produce when they are within a word, but they are not letters per se. No. Another thing to point out is that the letters K and W appear only in words borrowed from other languages. In the lesson, we will see that there are certain letters that are not very common in Spanish, and K and W are two very good examples for that. Bien. La pronunciación. So in regards to pronunciation, there are several letters with similar pronunciations. We will talk about that. And there are letters with multiple pronunciations. So those are two things to keep in mind. And that's something that as English speakers we are familiar with. One letter can produce different sounds depending on where the letter is within a word, what are the other letters around it. Likewise, there can be multiple letters that produce a similar sound. So we will identify those letters, see those patterns, and try to go over those, practice those. Again, some of the common combinations in Spanish are the double R, which produce a unique sound. There is, of course, a difference between the sound that you make when you see one R and when you see two R's. We'll talk about that. And then the already mentioned che and elle, the CH and the LL combinations. And then it's also worth noting that some of the common English combinations, like the ones we see here, double B, double D, double F, double G, double M, all of those combinations are common in English, but not so much in Spanish, no? Sometimes they may appear in words that are borrowed from another language, particularly from English, but most of the times we will not see those combinations in many Spanish words. The reason why I included a map here is so that we get an idea of the variety of the Spanish-speaking world is spoken in most of the Americas. And the countries highlighted here are those in which Spanish is the main language. So, of course, we have other countries like the United States in where Spanish is widely spoken, although it is not the dominant language. It is a widely spoken one. But we also have, of course, Spain in Europe and Equatorial Guinea in Western Africa. So that's important because that affects pronunciation. And the Spanish that is spoken in Mexico is very different from that is relatively different from that spoken in Chile or Spain or Cuba. So it's worth noting that although there is a standard Spanish, and we're going to look at some of the standard pronunciations, there are varieties that depend on the specific region from which the Spanish comes from, no? So it's important to keep that in mind. There is no one correct, rigid way of pronouncing words in Spanish, but that will tend to vary depending on the region where the Spanish speaker comes from or where the Spanish learner sort of learned the language. So going back to this slide, one thing that I do want to point out is that we will not be covering the pronunciation of every single letter. I think that would be a very tedious task and tiring. So we will make sure to focus and to just highlight those letters that which sound is particular to Spanish in comparison to English, and those letters that produce, again, multiple sounds or that share a similar sound with other letters. Bien, and we will start with las vocales, ¿no? Las vocales, we have 5 in Spanish, a, e, I, o, u. The good thing about these 5 letters is that they are very common, and that they tend to not present different pronunciations like they do in English. No, in English we see the letter A, and it can be A, it can be A, depending on where the letter is. In Spanish, we will always have the A sound. No, here we have agua, matemáticas. Again, it's worth noting that the sound repeats itself, even if the word starts with that letter, if it ends with that letter, if it is in the middle of it, we still have that same pronunciation of a, no? And here in the image next to it, we have árbol, avión, aguacate. Again, same sound, and that's going to be the case for all of these vowels. Regardless of where they are located within the word, the sound is the same, no? And another thing that I want to highlight is that in parentheses, you will find the English translation to some words, not to all of them, because I made sure to include words that are cognates, so words that you will be able to identify its meaning because of the similarity that it has to the English equivalent. No, matemáticas, as you can probably guess, is mathematics. So moving on, elegante or elegant, and interesante, interesting. Again, words that repeat the same vowel, that repeat the vowel E or E, and that allows us to see how the letter is pronounced in different parts of the word. No, elegante, interesante, elefante, escalera, estrella, or words that repeat the letter E or E, as it is pronounced in Spanish. And this is where there might be some confusion. The next letter is I in English, but in Spanish is E, no? In English, E is the second vowel. In in Spanish, E is I. No, so just make sure that is clear. So the pronunciation of E or I is the same pronunciation that we use when we see a double E in English. No, inteligente, idea, iguana, iglesia, insecto. All of those examples of this particular letter. Mm, and it's not a new sound, or it's a sound that we have in English, but that we tend to produce it um, sometimes with this letter, sometimes with a combination of others. Okay, next vowel O. We see it in oso, teléfono, oreja, ojo. Again, the letter doesn't change, the pronunciation doesn't change based on where it is located, so that's helpful. And it's not different from what we see in English, no? O, oso, teléfono, and then last vowel, U or U in Spanish, we see it with words like ayuda, which is help, universidad, which is, as you may guess, is university, uvas, unicornio, uno. So this is a sound that is produced in English with the double O, no? U, ayuda, universidad. Muy bien. Yeah, another aspect worth noting here is that we can see how these vowels tend to be separated into different syllables. For example, oso, teléfono, interesante. So it is. It seems to be that there is usually one vowel per syllable, no? However, that's not always the case. There are examples like agua, where we have agua, the U and the A being part of the same syllable. Likewise, aguacate, again, aguacate, that U and A, again, part of the same syllable. So that type of phenomena is called diphthongo or diphthong. And that is when we combine two vowels or two vowel sounds in one syllable. And that is only produced with a specific combination of vowels. For example, two successive weak vowels will produce a diphthongo, that is I or U together, or a combination of a strong vowel, A, E, or U, A, E, or O, and a weak vowel. When that happens, we pronounce the vowels in the same syllable, no? And we see that in some numbers, in the pronunciation of numbers like cuatro, which is 4, we do not pronounce the word cuatro, but cuatro, no? That U and A become part of the same syllable. So it becomes a word with only 2 syllables, no? With only qua and tro. Put them together to cuatro. Same thing with seis, becomes a word with only 1 syllable because that E and I sort of connect to create a diphthongo and to influence our pronunciation into just pronouncing the word in 1 syllable. Otherwise, we would say seis, which is not the case. Rather, we combine the diphthongo and pronounce seis. Same thing with siete. The pronunciation again of that vowel is sie. And complete the word with te, with the syllable te. So we have siete. And for number 10, we have diez, no? So the pronunciation of those numbers presents examples in where we have a combination of vowels within the same syllable. And again, we don't have to recall the terminology. This is the way that linguists call such phenomena, diphthongo. What we do need to remember, however, is that when we see that combination of vowels, 2 weak vowels together, or a weak vowel and a strong vowel next to each other, they will combine and create a diphthongo, which affects our pronunciation, and that's something that we want to make sure that it is as precise as possible. So we want to keep that in mind. Know that at times with certain combination of vowels, the pronunciation will be such that two vowels can combine into one syllable. That's not always the case, but in this particular context, it is. There will be times when we can have a weak vowel and a strong vowel, but the weak vowel has an accent mark, and therefore they are separated into different syllables, but we can look over that later. This is just an example to keep in mind, and we will see some more diphthongos in the following words that we cover. Okay, but moving on from vowels to the pronunciation of specific letters, specifically two letters that have the same pronunciation in Spanish. This is not the case in English, of course. We know that B and V produce different pronunciations in English. In Spanish, though they are different letters, they have the same pronunciation, no? So examples of these two letters in different words, we have video, we have cerveza, and vida. And notice how the pronunciation of the letter V is as if we were pronouncing the letter B, no? Libro, banco, baile, same pronunciation as V. So V and B in Spanish do not differentiate in pronunciation. Yes, they are different letters, but they are pronounced the same. And this is because in Spanish we don't have the sound V. When we have our upper teeth sort of touching our lower lip, and we produce that sound V, that doesn't happen in Spanish. No, that's a sound that does not exist in the language, because the letter that produces that sound in English produces another sound in Spanish, namely the sound that we have with the letter B. And that produces interesting phenomena, like, for example, what this image shows. We have botar and botar. Now, those are two different verbs that are pronounced exactly the same, and the only difference is their spelling. The initial letter for one is V, the initial letter for the other one is B, but we pronounce it the same. No, botar, to vote, as in going to a ballot and voting, and then botar, to throw away, as in throwing away trash. So I think this is an interesting image that speaks or underlines the similar or identical pronunciation between the two letters B and V. What can happen, and what it in fact does happen a lot of times, is that we have English speakers who will pronounce words like video, cerveza, vida, sort of producing that English V sound. If you do that, or if you were to do that, it will not cause any trouble, because again, that's a sound that doesn't exist in Spanish, or it cannot be confused with another word or with another sound, because you are using a sound that is not part of the Spanish language or of the Spanish alphabet, so it cannot really be confused with another word, no? So if you were to say something like video, cerveza, vida, there should be no confusion as to what you mean, no? But do know that the sound itself of V is simply not part of the Spanish language, no? We keep the same sound as with the letter B. Bien. Another example of letters that share a similar sound is with C, S, and zeta. No, those letters are C, S, and Z. In English, we also have the differentiation between C, C as in crying, or Z as in zebra. they are pronounced differently. They produce different sounds. In Spanish, they can produce the same sound, no? So but we need to be careful and understand that, for example, the letter C or se is a letter that produces more than one sound, no? It can produce a sound identical to the S and the Z in English. I'm sorry, it can produce the same sound as the letters S and Z, but it can also produce the same sounds as the letter K and Q. So how do we know what sound the letter C produces within a word in Spanish? We look at the letter next to it, no? Whenever the letter C is next to or in the same syllable as the vowels E or I, it is pronounced like the letters S and Z. For example, cielo, cien, cereal, cocina. And then cocina is kitchen, and is an example of a word that has the letter C twice and that it produces the two different sounds that the letter C has, no? Cocina, the initial syllable co has the letter C producing the K sound. The second syllable C has the letter C produce the S sound, no? So that's interesting, and that's I think that's something worth underlining. How this letter can produce more than one sound. So as you may guess, it produces the sound or a K whenever it is in the same syllable as the vowels A, O, or U. That is the case with cocina, for example. That first syllable is next to the letter O, so it produces that K sound. That second syllable is with the vowel I, so it produces the S sound. Other words that have the C produce the K and Q sounds are casa, kiosco, cama, comida. Not all of them are pretty common words in Spanish, maybe except for kiosco. The reason why I added kiosco here is because it has all of our three letters, no? The letters that we are focusing on now, kiosco, Q, S, and Q and C. It has S, where we looked at earlier. And we can see how, in this case, the letter C and the letter Q produce the same sound, kiosco, no? So that's something I think worth noting. Then there's not a word here with the letter K, because again, as mentioned before, the letter K is not very common in Spanish. It usually appears with words that are borrowings from other languages. But yeah, I think it's important to know that these three letters, C, S, and Z, produce the same sound. Not all of the time, of course, but whenever C is in the same syllable with vowels E or I, it does produce the same sound as the letters S and Z, which tend to be more consistent, always producing the same sound. Likewise, the letter C again can also produce the same sound as letters K and Q if they are with the vowels, if they are next to vowels A, O, or U. So here we have examples that sort of respond to the same category, namely clothes or clothing, which is ropa in Spanish. The first picture here on the top corner is saco y camiseta, so sort of like a suit and shirt. And we see how those letters that we just talked about produce their corresponding sounds. No, saco, again, C change into a K sound, and then camiseta, again, C is next to the vowel A, so it produces that K sound for camiseta. Next to it, we have calzoncillos or underwear, where we have the letter C, letter Z, and letter S, producing its corresponding sounds again. Or calzoncillos, we have again letter C producing the two sounds that it has, the two different sounds that it has. Calzoncillos, no? And we'll talk about this double L in a minute, producing this particular sound. Under that, we have calcetas or socks. Calcetas, again, that letter C, producing its two different sounds. And zapatos, no? Zapatos. The pronunciation of zapatos, the pronunciation of this Z, initial Z, and ending S is the same. No, we don't have to really make a different sound because they have the same sound in Spanish. Zapatos, calcetas, calzoncillos, saco y camiseta. No. Then another set of example. Now moving to a different category, to category of food or comida. Comida is food. We have again those same letters producing its corresponding sounds. Queso, which is here in top corner. Queso with its Q producing its K sound. Azúcar, azúcar or sugar. Café, café or coffee. And then kebab, no, which is clearly a borrowing from another language, but an example of the letter K in Spanish and how it produces the same sound as in English, or it's not something that really requires much practice. No, whenever we see the letter K, we tend to follow the same pronunciation as we would give it in English. No, so here we have queso, azúcar, café, kebab. No, seeing how that Q, C, and K produce the same sound. While in the previous example we saw how S, C, and Z can produce the same sound as well. No. Okay. Muy bien. So moving now to the next letter that we should focus on, la G, or the letter G. The letter G in Spanish produces a different sound than when we tend to give it in English, and again it produces different sounds depending on its context, not depending on the letters around it. So whenever we have the letter G next to the vowels E or I, we pronounce it as the English H. No, so corresponding to that sound, we have three examples here. Gente, gente. So again, that when we see G here next to the vowel E, we reproduce the same sound that we tend to give the English H. No, so gente. Agitación, which is agitation, and notice how the pronunciation may be very similar, agitation, agitación, but the sound, especially the sound of the letter G, is very different, no? From a G sound to a he sound, no? Agitación. In Argentina, same thing, exactly the same pronunciation as in English, Argentina, but a very different pronunciation, especially in that syllable G instead of J, no? Instead of Argentina, we have Argentina. Again, that G now producing the English H sound. So that's one of the possible sounds that this letter can produce, the letter G can produce. Gente, agitación, Argentina. But whenever the letter G is next to any other letter, that is any other letter that is not E or I, we pronounce the letter similar to the English G in a word like got, no? So a word like God, get, has the same or very similar sound to what we have in Spanish whenever the letter G is next to any other letter that is not E or I. And the examples here are gracias, gracias, which is thanks, gato, which is cat, gato, and Guatemala, no, Guatemala. So different from Argentina, we see that Guatemala has a very similar pronunciation to its English equivalent, same spelling and very similar pronunciation, something that was not the case for Argentina, ¿no? Muy bien. So again, worth noting that the letter G produces two different sounds, gente, gracias, agitación, gato, Argentina, Guatemala, ¿no? Muy bien. So that's it for the letter G. Of course, there are many other examples of words that have this letter, but the two main rules that we need to follow are that if we have G next to E or I, we pronounce it as the English H. If we have G next to any other letter, we pronounce it as one variant of the English G, the variant that we see in a word like got, no? Gracias, gato, Guatemala. Muy bien. Another letter worth highlighting because of its particularity in the Spanish language is the letter H or H. The letter itself, in how it is spelled, presents its peculiarities. No, we have H, that first H, the first H that we see in its spelling is silent. No, we say H, so we start the word with the vowel A, H, but then the second appearance of the letter H, that is when it appears following the letter C, it produces a very particular sound, no, che. So that sort of presents the peculiarities of the letter H whenever it is most of the time silent, unless it comes immediately after the letter C. No, if it comes after the letter C, then it produces the ch sound. No, for example, in most of the times we will see the letter H as silent, as in Honduras. Again, another country that is spelled exactly the same way as in English, but with a different pronunciation. No? In English, we will say Honduras. In Spanish, we will say Honduras because the H again is silent here. Same thing in the word hogar, alcohol, and hola. No, we spell it out. We spell the letter H in the word, of course, but we do not pronounce it because it is a silent letter in the language. No, alcohol, another example of a word that it is spelled exactly the same as in English, but with a very different pronunciation. In this case, alcohol is pronounced different from alcohol. No, in alcohol, we keep the H as silent, and therefore we only have two syllables. No, alcohol. Bien. So those are examples of the letter H whenever it is silent. However, the examples of when it comes after the letter C and it produces the che sound, we have ocho or 8, China, and hechos, which is facts. No. So the only time that the H really makes a difference in how we pronounce, okay, let me reword that. The only time that the H really produces a sound is whenever it is next next to that is right after, immediately after the letter C. And that combination, that letter combination C plus H is che, ocho, china, hechos. And it's similar in English, when we have a word like China, that same combination C and H produce that ch sound, no? So we will see that constantly in Spanish, no? Ocho, china, hechos, and there are many other words that repeats the same sound. And another combination that is worth noting, and one that we saw on a previous slide, is the double L, no? The L in Spanish produces the same sound as the L in English, but when we have two L's together, we have a different sound, no? In English, two L's together is also very common, but the sound doesn't change from two L's and one L. The pronunciation is the same in English when we have two L's and one L. That's not the case in Spanish, no? In Spanish, a word with the letter L, like, for example, lago or lake, the letter L produces the same sound as in English, but whenever we have two L's together, we have the sound for elle, no? And we have it in these examples: llave, lluvia, calle, no? A very particular sound now. So it's worth noting that combination is significant in Spanish in regards to pronunciation, something that is not the case in English, no? Writing two L's or writing one L would not change the pronunciation in English. It definitely would in Spanish, no? So again, llave, lluvia, and calle. No, those are the examples that we have for double L's, or elle, as we say in Spanish. Muy bien. Next letter, jota, or J, and again, this is a sound that is different from what we have in English for this letter. And a good example would be, for example, jamón. Jamón is spelled with a J, and it produces a similar sound to its English equivalent, which is spelled with an H, no? And that tells us that relationship between the pronunciation for the letter J in Spanish and the pronunciation for the letter H in English, no? Which is very similar. Jamón, ham. Hoja, leaf. And then we have hijo, which is son, and hija, which is daughter. And here we saw in hijo and in hoja, we see what we already talked about regarding the letter H is silent. So we start with the vowel, no? Hoja, jamón, hijo. So although in many sources you will see that the letter J is usually associated with, or its pronunciation is associated with the pronunciation of the letter of the English H, you do notice a sort of harder pronunciation with the Spanish J, no? Hoja, jamón, hijo, no? It requires you to sort of it requires a little bit more strength than the English H. Jamón, ham, is still a little different. No, it may be a similar, they may be proximate, but not quite identical. No, the pronunciations between the Spanish J and the English H, but it's definitely different from the English J. No, that we will see in jam or in Jamaica. No, in Spanish is Jamaica. So yes, that's another letter that produces a different pronunciation than its English equivalent. La jota, or letter J. Muy bien. And then we have the letter ñ. elle, and here we don't have an English translation because this is not a word that exists in the English language. Elle, that's the one word, as mentioned earlier, the one word, the one additional letter that we have in Spanish and we do not have in English. Its pronunciation, however, is not new to English speakers. It's something very similar to what English speakers pronounce when they see the letters N and Y together, as in the word canyon. Canyon produces a similar sound as the letter ñ in Spanish. So we have niño, we have España, uñas, diseño, and I'm sure you can identify the letter with the image next to it, niño or boy. So that small symbol on top of the N definitely is definitely significant in regards to pronunciation. Niño, the N in Spanish is the same as the N in English, but once we add that small symbol or accent on top of it, we have a different letter. Now we have ñ, and we have a different pronunciation, niño, and that's the only pronunciation that this letter has, because we see it again in España. España, here's the flag for Spain, España, and uñas or nails. Uñas also has that has this letter of ñ, as well as diseño, which is designed. Here we have we can say un diseño de uñas, so a design for nails. And where we see this letter, we see its pronunciation. Again, not a new pronunciation, not a new sound, but a new letter, no. And it is common. No, we will see it in other words in Spanish. As we expand our vocabulary, we will see more words with this particular letter and with this particular pronunciation, or ñ. It might be difficult to type it if your keyboard is not Spanish keyboard. You won't see it there, but it's definitely an important letter, and there are ways to type it. No, there are codes that you can find on Google to type the letter whenever you need to use it to write in Spanish. Muy bien. So the next letter is R. R. This letter again has two different sounds depending on the location of the letter in a word, and depending if there's double R. No, if there's double R, it has a different sound than if there is just one R within a word. And this examples here are able to sort of make visible or make clear those differences. If we have the letter R at the beginning of a word, or if we have two R's together, its pronunciation will be sort of a stronger R. No, we see that in rojo, or the color red, as we see in this picture, has a stronger R pronunciation. Rojo, Puerto Rico, perro, cachorro, carro. No, it's like the tongue is producing a vibrating sound with top of our mouth. Rojo, Puerto Rico, perro, cachorro, carro. No, it's definitely a stronger sound than what we see in our other set of examples, where there's a slight change in the pronunciation of the letter R when it appears in the middle of the word, not at the beginning, and when it is just one R. No, diccionario, arte, bar, Florida. And this pronunciation is significant because we have times where we have certain words that their only difference is the sound of the R. No, We have carro, which is car, and then we have caro, which is expensive. So two different words in where its only difference is the pronunciation of the R. No, if we have two R's, we have that strong sound carro. If we have one R, caro, we have a different sound. So it's important to make note of that, to make sure that that we understand that the sound is significant, because if we pronounce the single R whenever we say double R, then we will be using a different word. No. So again, a strong R, rojo, Puerto Rico, perro, cachorro, carro. Perro and cachorro are the same thing. Perro, dog. Cachorro is usually the word used for a puppy, for a small dog. And the pronunciation again of words that have the single R in the middle of the word. Diccionario, arte, bar, Florida. No. So I hope the difference in sound that this two the difference in sound in the R are hopefully apparent and clear. And we will see more examples of the letter R in different words as we continue to continue the lesson. Muy bien. La X or the letter X is not the most common letter in the Spanish language, but it is worth highlighting that it also has two different sounds. No, this is again one letter, two sounds. Usually pronounced like the English X. No, usually it shares that same sound, but it can also be pronounced like the Spanish J, which we covered already, which is a similar to the English H, and that is the case in words like Mexico. We have the letter X, but we have the sort of H pronunciation in the middle syllable. Mexico, Javier, Jimena. No, and those Javier and Jimena are two names, proper names, sometimes spelled with a J, sometimes spelled with an X, but the pronunciation is Javier. No, Javier, Jimena. So we have that possibility with the letter X, but we also have one that is closer to the English pronunciation of the letter. Tóxico, xenophobia, saxophone. No, saxophone, again, this the instrument that we see here. Xenophobia is the same as the English word, xenophobia. Tóxico, same as the English cognate, toxic. And the pronunciation of that letter is very similar here. No, tóxico, xenophobia, saxophone. I guess the curiosity here is that it also has that additional sound, Mexico, Javier, Jimena, that the English X doesn't have. No, the English X will never be pronounced like the H like the English H. So it is worth noting. I mean, it's not very common, and unlike the letter C, we don't have specific rules that tell us, okay, when is the letter X going to be pronounced like an X? When is it going to be pronounced like a J? We don't have rules in that regard. Maybe because it's not as common as with the letter C. That the letter C appears, for example, here with tóxico, with Mexico, as a K pronunciation. I guess just remembering and being able to recall the pronunciation of these words. Again, it's not very common to see the letter X in the Spanish language. So little by little, we will be able to recall and remember when the letter X is pronounced like an English X and when is it pronounced like an English H. No. Bien. Because when I was looking this up again, there were sources that said that it is pronounced like an English H whenever it is at the beginning of a word, but then we have words like xenophobia, which make it clear that even if there is a pattern in that direction, it is not the rule. So yeah, so for now, I think it's important to be aware that the letter X has two sounds, Mexico, Toxico, depending on the word. See, so those are some of the letters that I think are worth highlighting. Many of other letters that we didn't touch on, letters like N or M, P, D, T are letters that do not really vary too much from its English pronunciation. Also, so I thought it wasn't necessary to give it a lot of time because they do not have different pronunciations from what we already know as English speakers, but rather I wanted to focus on the letters that do produce different sounds, that may have multiple sounds, that may share a sound with other letters. I think that was more important for me. And I'm pretty sure it will be more helpful for you to be able to practice those different sounds produced by these letters than to go over what you already know from your experience with English. Muy bien. So, moving beyond the pronunciation of specific letters and the sounds that they produce, it's also worth noting another aspect of Spanish that we do not see in English, and that is written accent marks. No, an accent is just an emphasis of a syllable within a word. All words that have more than one syllable have an emphasis on a specific syllable. It just helps us pronounce the words better and more accurately. However, in Spanish, we have written accent marks that tell the speakers when an emphasis is not located in the syllable that we would expect it to be. No, and we build those expectations based on a rule, based on two rules that we have here. A word that ends in a vowel, in the letter N or in the letter S, is stressed on the next to last syllable. No, so even just here, we have the three words here. The title of the slide: los acentos escritos, all end in the letter S, and all have their emphasis on the letter on the next to last syllable, on the second to last syllable. Los is just a one syllable word, so we don't have to worry about it. But then we have acentos. The emphasis is on that sen syllable. Acentos escritos. So again, the emphasis in the word escritos is in that second to last syllable. Cri is where we have our emphasis. In one way to make sure that we understand where the emphasis is when we hear a word is if we present alternative examples. Now, when we say a word like acentos, we are not saying acentos, we are not saying acentos, we are saying acentos. No, there is a slight but significant difference in where we put the emphasis in Spanish words, because a lot of times we have the same spelling, the same everything, but the only thing that changes is where we put our emphasis. So that is significant. Sometimes there's a difference between one word and another. So it's important that we are aware of these rules and that we put the emphasis, we emphasize the correct syllable in a word. Otherwise, we may be producing the incorrect word, no? The other rule is that a word that ends in a consonant other than N or S, that is, words that don't end on a vowel or an N or on an S, their stress will be on the last syllable. Again, those are the two rules that Spanish speakers have for where the emphasis should be in a word. Whenever those two rules are not followed, that's when we write an accent mark on top of a word. So when a word's pronunciation does not follow these rules, they need a written accent mark. Otherwise, in most cases, Spanish words do not have a written accent mark because they will tend to follow one of these two rules, no? So what do we have here? We have a extensive list of Spanish words, some that we already saw earlier, some that we haven't. But what we can do here is go over these words, go over their pronunciation, practice some of the things that we covered, and also look where the emphasis is and ask ourselves, does this need a written accent mark or does it follow one of the two rules that we just saw? In order to do this, we need to separate the word into different syllables. That's something that we do when we pronounce the word. And I think this is a good way to review some of the top main aspects that we covered. No, we talked about the pronunciation of vowels, the pronunciation of different other letters. We talked about diptongos and how sometimes when we combined a weak and a strong vowel, we put them in the same syllable. So we will see that, for example, with estudiar, we have I and A, two different vowels that one is weak, one is strong. So we put them in the same syllable, and that's how we pronounce it. No, estudiar, not estudiar, but estudiar. So pronouncing these words, looking at their where the emphasis, where the accentuation is, will help us in this regard. But it also bringing back everything else that we covered throughout this lesson, about Spanish alphabet and pronunciation. So we have a word like libro or book, 2 syllables, libro. Again, it's not libro, it's libro, meaning that it ends in a vowel, so it has its emphasis on the second to last syllable. So this first column here, we have all of these words have its emphasis on the second to last syllable, which is one of the rules. Therefore, we do not need a written accent mark. No, the accentuation, the emphasis is where we expect it to be. So there's no need to write an accent mark on top of that vowel. Another thing worth noting is that accent marks, written accent marks, only go on top of vowels to show that the syllable corresponding to that vowel should be emphasized in its pronunciation. So we have libro, mesa, examen, imagen, gracias, carro, casa, clase. No? Again, we pronounce clase, not clase, no clase, clase. No difference in where we put our emphasis. The emphasis in this case should be in the second to last syllable, clase. The cases where the emphasis should be on the last syllable is when the word ends on a consonant rather than N or S, no? Usually it would be the consonant would be R. So verbs like estudiar, to study, they have the emphasis on that last syllable. Usted, papel, lugar, profesor, mujer. No? Again, estudiar, usted, papel, lugar, profesor, mujer. This column has words with an emphasis on the last syllable, but because they end on a consonant other than N or S, they are expected to have the emphasis on that last syllable, so we do not need to write it down because the accentuation is where we expect it to be. So most words will fall in one of these two categories. That is, usually it would be this first column. No, the accent is on the second to last syllable, or the emphasis on the second to last syllable, but the word ends on N, S, or a vowel, and therefore it doesn't require for us to write the accent mark. However, we also have cases where the words do require a written accent mark because they do not follow one of the two rules that we mentioned. For example, café. Café ends on a vowel, but it has its emphasis on the last syllable, not second to last. No, we do not say café, we say café. Lápiz, dólar, álbum, difícil, fácil, ¿no? Again, café, lápiz, dólar, álbum, difícil, fácil. These words are looking at lápiz down to fácil. All of those words are expected to have their emphasis on the last syllable because they all end in a consonant other than N or S. However, they do not have their emphasis on the last syllable, but on the second to last syllable, meaning that we do need to write the accent mark on that second to last syllable to let the speaker or the reader know how to pronounce the word. No, we do not say dólar, we say dólar. We do not say lápiz, we say lápiz. So that's important, no? And then on the last set of words, I don't know if you can see that. We have words that do not have an emphasis on the last syllable or on the second to last syllable, but on the third to last syllable. And these words are called palabras esdrújulas, words that have its emphasis on the third to last syllable, and therefore they will always need a written accent mark because the emphasis falls in the third to last syllable. No, here we don't have to worry about the last letter of the word. If the emphasis falls on the third to last syllable, those words automatically will require a written accent mark. As we can see here, matemáticas, matemáticas, película, película, bolígrafo, bolígrafo, América, América, teléfono, teléfono, and máquina, máquina. No, so we have the emphasis of the word falls in the third to last syllable in this set of words, and therefore they require a written accent mark. So this is a particularly difficult aspect of the Spanish language, especially for non-native Spanish speakers. But once we understand that it follows a specific procedure, and of course there are more things worth mentioning that we do not have time for now, but the main thing is that there are two rules in regards to where should Spanish speakers expect a word to, what syllable do we expect a word to have an emphasis on. If the word follows those two rules, then we do not need to write an accent mark on the word. If they do not, then we do need to write an accent mark on this syllable, specifically on the vowel corresponding to the syllable that has the emphasis. No, and this is something that will help us better pronounce the words, because that's what an accent mark is. Not something that tells us where the emphasis is, so that we pronounce it correctly. Mm-hmm. But of course, this will require us to practice more. But at least now we understand the logic and the sort of process behind writing accent marks in Spanish. And one last thing that also has to do with writing. Another aspect about writing in Spanish has to do with punctuation. Interrogation and exclamation marks appear at the beginning and at the end of the phrase. So in English and in most languages, or in many languages at least, we only write and we only have punctuation marks at the end of a sentence, whether it is an interrogation mark, an exclamation mark, a period. In English, in Spanish, if we have a question or if we have an exclamation, that phrase needs to be sort of put in between punctuation marks, in between question marks or in between exclamation marks. So an example of that will be something like, ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás? Or if we want to respond to that with some sort of excitement or exclamation, we can respond, estoy bien. ¿Cómo estás? How are you? Estoy bien. I'm well. Just to exemplify what I mean by having those marks at the beginning and at the end of the phrase, something that we don't see in English, but that it is required in written Spanish. Just to keep in mind, so that whenever we read or whenever we write in this language, we understand those differences. So that pretty much brings to an end this lesson about the alphabet and the pronunciation in Spanish, with a specific emphasis on those letters and those aspects of the Spanish language that are different from what we are used to in English. I hope this was helpful. And feel free to pause and go back to any aspect that you would want to review. There are many resources also in the internet online to continue reviewing and practicing some of the aspects covered here. Gracias. Hasta luego.
Crossing Borders Language Center in Katy is the best language school. You can learn easy peasy English, Spanish, French, and Mandarin at affordable rates. Call 832-437-9864 today. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to Easy Peasy for more videos, and please share. We love you, Easy Peasy.